Wan sat nervously in the library, waiting for Taehyung to arrive. Her heart thudded in her chest, a mix of excitement and anxiety. She had never expected to be paired with the Kim Taehyung, the most popular guy in school, for their semester project. Even though he had a girlfriend, the idea of spending time with him made her feel both giddy and guilty. When Taehyung finally walked in, Ryan couldn't help but steal a glance at him. He looked effortlessly handsome as usual, his dark hair falling slightly over his forehead. He smiled when he saw her, a warm, friendly expression that made her insides flutter. Hey Ryan, he greeted, taking a seat beside her. Sorry I'm late. Ready to get started? Yeah, of course, Ryan replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She pulled out her notes, but she could feel his presence so acutely that it was hard to concentrate. As they discussed the project, Ryan found herself slowly relaxing. Taehyung was easy to talk to, his laid back attitude making her feel comfortable. They bounced ideas off each other, and before long, they were laughing about something silly he had said. You're really good at this, Taehyung remarked, leaning in a little closer as they reviewed a diagram Ryan had sketched out. Ryan blushed at the compliment. Thanks, I guess. I just really like organizing things. I can tell, Taehyung chuckled. I'm glad we got paired together. You make this whole project thing way less stressful. Ryan smiled shyly, feeling her heart skip a beat. I'm glad too. Over the next few weeks, Ryan and Taehyung met regularly to work on their project. Sometimes they met in the library, but more often than not, they ended up at each other's houses. It was during sessions that their friendship began to deepen. At Taehyung's house, Ryan found herself surprised by how normal and down to earth he was. Despite his popularity, he was kind and attentive, always asking for her opinion and genuinely listening to what she had to say. Want something to drink? He asked one afternoon as they sat in his living room, surrounded by textbooks and papers. Water's fine, Ryan answered, watching as he walked to the kitchen. She couldn't help but admire the way he moved, so confident and effortless. When he returned with the water, he handed it to her with a smile as they continued working together. Ryan found herself falling even harder for Taehyung, but no matter how close they grew, she couldn't forget that he had a girlfriend. Not when he had a photo frame of her on his study table. There was a line she knew that she couldn't cross. One day, Vine wandered through the quiet aisles of the school library, her fingers trailing lightly over the spines of the book as she searched for a reference book she needed for the project. The library was almost always deserted at this time of the day, offering a peaceful retreat from the bustling school corridors. She loved the solitude, the way the silence allowed her to focus entirely on her thoughts. As she rounded a corner towards the back of the library, Vine suddenly froze. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the familiar figure of Minji, Taehyung's girlfriend, standing between the rows of the dusty shelves. Vine felt like the ground had dropped out from under her feet. She quickly ducked back behind the bookshelf, her breath caught in her throat. What was she supposed to do? She peeked around the corner again, hoping she had somehow imagined it, but there they were, completely oblivious to the world around them. Her first instinct was to pull out her phone and take a picture, but turns out her phone ran out of battery. Van backed away slowly, her mind racing. Taehyung had to know about this, but how could she tell him he loved Minji, and Van knew how deeply it would hurt him to find out. Still, she couldn't let him go on being deceived. Gathering her thoughts, she resolved to tell him the truth as soon as possible, no matter how difficult it would be. Later that day, Vian found Taehyung in the courtyard sitting under a tree and reviewing his notes. She approached him cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. Taehyung, she called softly. He looked up, his expression brightening as he saw her. Hey Wan, what's up? Wan hesitated, suddenly unsure how to start. She bit her lip, glancing around to make sure no one else was within earshot. Can we talk? It's about Minji. Taehyung's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded, putting his notes aside. Sure, what's going on? Taking a deep breath, Ryan sat beside him. I was in the library earlier today and I saw something I think you need to know about. Taehyung frowned, concern creeping into his eyes. What is it? Ryan's hand trembled slightly as she clasped them together. I saw Minji with another guy. For a moment, Taehyung just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head, a small disbelieving smile playing on his lips. No, you must have seen someone else. Minji wouldn't do that. I'm sure it was her, Ryan insisted, her voice wavering. I know this is hard to hear, but I thought you should know. I wouldn't lie about something like this, Taehyung. His expression hardened, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. Ryan, I appreciate that you're worried, but you must be mistaken. Minji and I are fine. We're happy. But Taehyung, no, he interrupted, his tone firm. This isn't something I want to hear. Minji isn't like that, okay? She wouldn't cheat on me. Ryan's heart ached as she saw the pain and anger building behind his eyes. She wanted to reach out to him to make him understand that she was only trying to help, but she could see that he wasn't ready to listen. Not yet. I'm not trying to hurt you, Ryan whispered, her voice barely audible. I just don't want you to get hurt. Taehyung's jaw tightened and he stood up abruptly, gathering his things. Let's just focus on the project, okay? I don't want to talk about this anymore. Before Ryan could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone under the tree. She watched him go, her heart heavy with a mix of guilt and frustration. She had tried to do the right thing, but it had only made things worse. Over the next few days, Ryan tried to bring up the subject with Taehyung again, but each time he shut her down more forcefully. Ryan, I don't want to hear it, he snapped one afternoon when she mentioned Minji again. They were at his house, sitting at the dining table with their project material spread out between them. But Taehyung, she's lying to you, Ryan protested, feeling desperation creep into her voice. You deserve to know the truth. The truth, he echoed bitterly, slamming his pen down on the table. The truth is that you don't know anything about our relationship. You're just making assumptions based on something you think you saw. I know what I saw, Wine shot back, tears of frustration welling up in her eyes. I'm trying to help you. Well, I don't need your help, Taehyung retorted, his voice cold and cutting. Maybe you should just stop worrying about my relationship and focus on your own life. His words stung like a slap, and Wine recoiled, stunned by the harshness of his tone. She had never seen him like this before, so angry, so unwilling to listen. She knew he was lashing out because he didn't want to believe what she was telling him, but it didn't make it hurt any less. For the rest of their meeting, they walked in tense silence, the air thick with unspoken words. The following days were no better. Taehyung began avoiding her outside of their project work, and when they did meet, he was distant and curt. Vian's heart broke a little more each time he brushed her off or looked at her with cold eyes. She missed the way they used to laugh together, the way he used to tease her or compliment her ideas. Now it felt like he was shutting her out completely and she didn't know how to reach him anymore. Despite everything, Vian couldn't bring herself to give up. She cared too much about Taehyung to just let him keep living a lie, even if it meant he would hate her for it. She kept hoping that he would come around, that he would realize she was telling the truth before it was too late. But each day that passed, each harsh word he threw at her made that hope feel more and more like a distant dream. Even with the tension that had settled between them, Ryan and Taehyung continued working on their project. Their meetings were now devoid of the laughter and easy conversation that had once made them so enjoyable. Instead, the atmosphere was thick with an unspoken unease, both of them pretending that everything was fine when it was anything but fine. Ryan tried to focus on the project, throwing herself into the work to distract from the ache in her heart every time she saw Taehyung. She hated seeing him like this, distant, cold, and hurt, even if he refused to admit it. She knew she had done the right thing by telling him about Minji, but that knowledge didn't make the rift between them any easier to bear. But the doubt lingered in the back of his mind, gnawing at him when he was alone at night, replaying Ryan's words over and over again. He didn't want to believe it, but there was a part of him, small but growing, that couldn't completely dismiss what Ryan had said. One evening, after a relatively silent meeting at the library, Taehyung offered to drive Minji home. It was something he always did, a small act of care that he took pride in. She lived in a nice apartment building not too far from the school, and he enjoyed the short drive, the way she would lean her head on his shoulder or hum along to the radio. The night was no different. Minji was cheerful as she chatted about her day, but Taehyung noticed a subtle change in her behavior. She seemed a little too eager to leave the car, brushing off his offer to walk her to the door with a quick kiss and a hurried, "I'll text you later, okay?" "Sure," Taehyung said, smiling despite the strange feeling in his gut. "Good night, my lady." "Good night," she replied, giving him one last wave before disappearing into the building. As he watched her go, Taehyung sighed and turned the key in the ignition, preparing to drive home. But when he glanced over at the passenger seat, he noticed something small and red against the dark fabric, Minji's lipstick. Smiling to himself, Taehyung picked it up. She'd probably need it tomorrow, and he didn't mind running back up to give it to her. Besides, it gave him an excuse to see her for just a little longer. He parked the car and jogged up to her apartment. When he reached the door, he found it slightly ajar. He hesitated, a chill running down his spine as he remembered the conversation that had driven a wedge between him and Ryan. The nagging doubt returned, stronger this time, as he pushed the door open. Minji, he called out softly as he stepped inside. The lights were dim, the apartment unusually quiet. He took a few steps further, his footsteps muted on the soft carpet. Then he heard it, a low murmur of voices, a quiet giggle that wasn't Minji's usual laugh. The sound was coming from her bedroom. Taehyung's heart pounded in his chest and his hand tightened around the lipstick as he moved towards the partially opened door. He paused just outside, his breath shallow, afraid of what he might see but unable to turn away. He pushed the door open slowly, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The lipstick slipped from his grasp and hit the floor with a soft thud. The sound broke the spell, and Minji and the guy looked up. Their faces registering shock and guilt as they saw Taehyung standing in the doorway. But the lie was weak, even to her own ears. Taehyung's eyes burned with a mix of betrayal and anger, his hands trembling at his sides as he struggled to process what he was seeing. Not what it looks like, he repeated, his voice hollow. Minji, how long? The guy beside her shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Taehyung's gaze. Minji's face crumpled with guilt, tears welling up in her eyes as she stammered. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I was going to tell you. Tell me, Taehyung interrupted, his voice rising in disbelief. You were going to tell me what, Minji? That you've been lying to me this whole time? That you've been cheating on my back? She pleaded, getting out of her bed and moving towards him. I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened. just happened? Taehyung's laugh was bitter, devoid of any humor. He shook his head, stepping back from her. What about me, Minji? What was I? Just some placeholder until you found someone else? Minji's tears boiled over, and as she reached for him, but he stepped further away, shaking his head. Don't, Minji. Don't touch me. Without another word, Taehyung turned and walked out, leaving Minji standing there crying and calling after him. The pain in his chest was suffocating, every step away from her feeling like a wound being torn open. He stumbled out of the apartment building, barely able to breathe. As he reached his car, he leaned against the door, his vision blurring with unshed tears. Vine was right. She had tried to warn him, and he had refused to listen, too blinded by his own denial to see the truth. Now the truth was all he could see, and it shattered him. The one person he had trusted most had betrayed him in the worst possible way. And the one person who had cared enough to tell him the truth, he had pushed her away. He didn't know where to go, what to do. All he knew was that everything he had believed in had come crashing down around him, leaving him broken and alone in the dark.